My ex-husband invited me to his wedding, then whispered, "Don't let me marry her." Hey viewers, we are excited to bring another amazing story. Please kindly hit the subscribe button, like this video and also share to your friends and loved ones. Thank you so much. Now let's dive right in. My name is Amanda, and life after my divorce had been strange. The first few months were filled with silence and loneliness. I moved to a new city, hoping to escape the ghost of my past. But no matter how far I went, the memories of my marriage to Daniel followed me. We had been so in love once, or so I thought. The way he looked at me with those gentle eyes, how he made me feel like the only woman in the world, until he didn't. And when he left, it was as though a huge part of me had disappeared with him. It's been 2 years since the divorce, and I've finally started to find myself again. But the past has a way of catching up with you when you least expect it. One morning, as I was sipping my coffee and scrolling through my emails, one subject line stood out: wedding invitation, Daniel and Clara. I froze. Daniel was getting married. To Clara. The woman he had been seeing while we were still married. The woman who had been a part of our lives in the shadows, always lurking. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My chest tightened, and my heart pounded in my ears. I clicked on the email, trying to brace myself for whatever it said. The invitation was formal, the kind you'd expect for a big event. It wasn't just an invitation, it was a demand. He wanted me to be there. "I would love for you to attend," the email read. "It would mean a lot to me if you could make it. I want you to be a part of this chapter of my life." My first instinct was to delete the email and forget it ever happened. But I didn't. I sat there, staring at the screen, my fingers trembling on the keyboard. Why? I whispered to myself. Why would he want me there? I didn't have an answer. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized how much I didn't want to be there. But something inside me told me that I needed to go. Maybe it was the curiosity, or maybe it was a strange sense of closure that I never got. I replied, my fingers moving over the keys faster than I could think. "I'll be there," I typed. "But I'm not sure why you want me there." The reply came quickly. "Trust me, you'll understand when you see me." I didn't know what that meant. But I had to go. I had to know what was going on in his mind. The day of the wedding arrived faster than I expected. I found myself standing in front of the mirror, looking at the woman I had become. I had healed, or so I thought. But today, it felt like stepping back into the past, like I was about to relive the worst chapter of my life. The venue was beautiful, a grand hall with sparkling chandeliers and elegant decorations. Guests milled around, chatting and laughing, their faces all unfamiliar. I felt like an outsider in my own life. When I saw Daniel, he was standing at the front, looking dashing in his tuxedo. But he wasn't smiling, not like the men I used to know. He looked nervous. And his eyes found mine across the room, locking onto me like he was seeing a ghost. I swallowed hard and walked toward him, trying to ignore the pang in my chest. I knew this was going to be difficult, but nothing could have prepared me for the moment when he turned to face me and whispered, "Don't let me marry her." His words hit me like a freight train. My heart raced, and for a moment, everything around me faded into the background. It was just me and Daniel, standing in that moment, as if time had stopped. "What do you mean?" I whispered back, my voice barely audible. I felt a chill run down my spine. He looked around, making sure no one else could hear. "I'm making the biggest mistake of my life. I don't want to marry Clara. I still love you, Amanda." The words felt like they were meant for someone else. The man I had once known was standing before me, his eyes filled with regret, but also with something more, something that made me question everything I thought I knew. "I don't know what to say," I replied, my voice shaky. "You're about to marry her. Why would you say something like this now?" He shook his head, his face full of pain. "I don't want to hurt you. But I'm trapped. I made a mistake, Amanda. I never should have left you for her." I didn't know how to respond. My mind was spinning, my emotions all over the place. Part of me wanted to scream at him, tell him how much he had hurt me. But another part of me, another part still cared for him, still wanted to believe in the men I once loved. The music began to play, signaling that the ceremony was about to start. I couldn't process everything Daniel had just said. My mind was a whirlwind, and my heart was a battlefield. "I can't do this, Daniel," I said, my voice shaking. "I can't be a part of this. You need to figure out what you want. I can't be your safety net." With that, I turned and walked away. But as I did, I felt his eyes on me, watching me with a mixture of desperation and longing. As I sat in the back of the room, the ceremony began. But I couldn't focus. All I could think about was what Daniel had said. What did he want from me? Why was he putting me in this position? And then, as I sat there, I felt a sense of dread wash over me. I had no idea what was coming next. But I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't prepared for the storm that was about to hit. As the music played and the guests stood up, signaling the start of the ceremony, I sat in the back row, my mind racing. I couldn't focus. All I could think about were the words Daniel had whispered to me moments ago. "Don't let me marry her." How could I ignore that? How could I just sit here and pretend everything was normal when the man I had once loved had just confessed that he was making the biggest mistake of his life? My heart beat faster as I glanced up at the altar. Clara stood there, glowing in her white gown, a picture of happiness. She had no idea what was happening. She had no idea that the man she was about to marry was questioning his decision, torn between her and me. I swallowed hard, feeling a knot form in my stomach. I needed to do something. I couldn't just sit here and watch him make this decision, knowing that he didn't truly want it. But before I could act on my thoughts, Daniel caught my eye. His gaze was intense, filled with a mix of confusion and regret. He had always been good at hiding his emotions, but in that moment, there was no denying it: he was not ready for this marriage. I looked around the room, searching for someone, anyone, to explain what was happening. But all the guests were smiling, waiting eagerly for the ceremony to begin. It felt like I was the only one who knew the truth, the only one who understood the chaos inside Daniel's heart. And then, the worst thing happened. Clara caught sight of me. Her eyes widened when she saw me sitting in the back, her expression flickering between confusion and anger. She had to have known who I was. We had crossed paths several times during the course of Daniel's and my marriage, though we never spoke. The truth was, she had always been the other woman, the one Daniel couldn't seem to let go of, even when he was still with me. "Why is she here?" Clara whispered to her mother, who stood next to her. Her voice was sharp, barely contained. I could hear the venom in her words. She knew. She must have known that I had been married to Daniel, that I was the one he had left for her. But the way she looked at me, like I was the one who had stolen him away from her, it made my blood boil. Daniel's mother, who had always treated me like her own daughter, was sitting in the front row. She shot me a reassuring glance, her eyes full of sympathy, but I could see the worry etched on her face. She had always been on my side, even when Daniel's decision tore us apart. She knew, deep down, that he was making a mistake. The officiant began to speak, asking everyone to take their seats, but the tension in the room was unbearable. I wanted to leave. I wanted to walk out of that room and never look back. But something kept me glued to my chair. Maybe it was the way Daniel's eyes kept following me, or maybe it was the unfinished conversation we had started earlier. Whatever it was, I couldn't tear myself away. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, Daniel's voice cut through the chaos. "Amanda," he whispered loudly enough for only me to hear. "Please, come up here." My heart skipped a beat. The entire room fell silent, and I could feel the eyes of the guests on me. I looked at Daniel, unsure of what to do. "Amanda," he repeated, his voice louder this time, "I need you to be here. I can't do this without you." The tension in the air was suffocating. Everyone stared at me, and I felt the weight of their gazes pressing down on me. Clara looked at me with pure fury, her hands trembling at her sides. She knew what Daniel was asking, and she wasn't going to take it lightly. "What do you mean, Daniel?" I whispered, standing up slowly. I wasn't sure if I was doing the right thing, but I couldn't just sit there. "Not now. I'm not ready," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm not ready to marry her. I never should have left you. You're the one I still want. I never stopped loving you." The words hung in the air like a heavy fog, and I could feel the shock ripple through the room. Guests exchanged glances, unsure of how to react. Some gasped, while others whispered behind their hands. Clara's face turned pale, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. "You're making a huge mistake," Clara finally spoke, her voice shaking with anger. She looked at me like I was the enemy. "He's mine now. You had your chance, Amanda. He chose me." I could feel my heart breaking as I listened to her words. The woman I had once trusted, The woman who had been my friend, was now the one standing between me and the man I thought I could never have again. But Daniel wasn't having it. He stepped toward me, his eyes pleading. I made a mistake, Clara. I never stopped loving Amanda. I never should have left her for you. Please, just give me one more chance. Clara's face twisted with rage. You're making a fool of yourself, she spat. You think she's going to take you back? After everything you've done? You think she's going to forgive you? I wanted to shout at her, to tell her that she didn't know the whole story, that she didn't understand what had happened between Daniel and me. But I didn't. Instead, I turned to Daniel, my heart aching with confusion and anger. I don't know what you want from me, I said, my voice shaky. You're about to marry her. Why are you doing this? Daniel looked at me, his eyes filled with regret. I'm sorry. I made a huge mistake. I was scared, Amanda. I thought I needed Clara, but I was wrong. You're the one I want. You're the one I should have always been with. Clara let out a bitter laugh. You really think she's going to forgive you? She asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. You really think she's just going to walk away from me and be with you again? The room was silent. No one knew what to say. I didn't know what to say. And then, in that moment, I realized something. I had been living in the shadow of my past for far too long. Daniel may have been the love of my life, but that life was over. I couldn't keep holding on to the hope that we would pick up where we left off. He had moved on, and I had to move on too. I turned to Daniel and said, You need to go through with this, Daniel. If you love me, you'll let me go. His eyes filled with tears, and I could see the pain in his expression. But it was time. It was time for both of us to let go. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice breaking. With that, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving behind the love I once thought would last forever. A week had passed since the wedding that never was. I tried to move on with my life, but the events that had unfolded were like an unshakable cloud over me. The echo of Daniel's desperate plea still haunted me. The way he had looked at me, the words that had slipped from his mouth as he stood before Clara, still lingered. But I had made my choice. I couldn't go back. Even if I wanted to. In the quiet of my apartment, I found myself thinking about him again, Daniel. He had been my world once. We shared laughter, tears, dreams, and somewhere along the way, it all fell apart. I couldn't pretend like I didn't care anymore. But my heart had healed. I had healed. Then, one day, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. Hesitant, I answered. Amanda, it's me. Daniel, came the familiar voice on the other end. I felt a jolt in my chest. I hadn't heard from him since the wedding debacle. Daniel? I whispered, almost not believing it. What do you want? He sighed deeply, his voice filled with an emotion I couldn't quite place. Can we meet? I need to explain something to you. Something important. I didn't know what to think. I wanted to say no. I wanted to tell him that it was over and there was nothing left to say. But something inside me told me that this was the moment I had been waiting for, closure. I'll meet you, I replied, my voice steady. But don't expect anything else. The coffee shop we chose was quiet, with only a few patrons sitting by the windows, sipping their drinks. I walked in and spotted him immediately. He looked older somehow, worn down, his face etched with worry lines. He was sitting at a corner table, staring into his coffee as if he could find the answers there. When I approached him, he looked up, his eyes tired but desperate. Amanda, thank you for meeting me. I sat across from him, trying to keep my emotions in check. What's this about, Daniel? I thought we were done. You made your choice. He nodded slowly, his hand shaking slightly as he reached for his coffee. I know. And I've lived with the consequences of that decision every single day. But what happened that day at the wedding, what I said to you, it's been eating me alive. I didn't respond right away, just listened. The tension between us was palpable. My heart, though cautious, was curious. I wasn't just marrying Clara because I wanted to, he continued, his voice heavy with regret. I was doing it because of a promise I made to my father on his deathbed. My eyes widened. A promise to his father? I had no idea what he was talking about. What do you mean? Daniel looked down at his hands, unable to meet my gaze. When my father was dying, he was in debt, huge debt. Clara's family helped us out. They paid off everything. But in return, my father made me promise that I would marry her. He wanted to settle the debt in some way, even after he was gone. He asked me to marry Clara, to make sure her family stayed loyal to us. My mouth went dry. This was a side of Daniel I had never seen before. The man I had married had always been the one who made decisions with his heart. But now, it seemed like everything had been controlled by an obligation to repay a debt that wasn't even his to begin with. But Daniel, I said, my voice trembling, that's not love. That's not a choice. You should have walked away from that promise. You should have done what was right for you, not for your father or Clara's family. He nodded, tears welling in his eyes. I know. But I couldn't. I felt like I had no other choice. I was trapped, Amanda. Trapped by a promise that I didn't make, but one I had to keep. I sat back in my chair, trying to process everything he was saying. It all made sense now, the guilt he carried, the way he had always been so distant. He hadn't been in love with Clara, he had been in love with the idea of fulfilling his father's dying wish. But you didn't have to stay with her, Daniel, I whispered, more to myself than to him. You could have chosen me. You could have chosen your happiness. I should have, he said, his voice cracking. I'm sorry, Amanda. I made the biggest mistake of my life. And now, I don't know how to fix it. The silence stretched between us as I thought about everything that had happened. My heart still ached for him, but I knew that this was the end. I couldn't let him back into my life. Not now, not after everything. I'm sorry, Daniel, I said quietly, my voice filled with a mixture of sorrow and acceptance. But it's too late. You had your chance, and you chose wrong. His face crumpled, and he looked like he might break down right there. I know. I ruined everything. And now, I have nothing. Not even her. Clara, she's not who I thought she was. I raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Daniel leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. She's manipulative, Amanda. I didn't see it before, but now I do. She's been controlling me, using me to get what she wants. I was blind to it. I was so blinded by my obligation that I didn't see how toxic she was. The word stung like a slap across the face. How had I never seen it? How had I been so naive about Clara? But it wasn't about her anymore. It was about Daniel. And the truth was, I couldn't go back. You should have seen that before, Daniel, I said softly, my voice shaking with emotion. You should have seen who she really was. But I can't be your second chance. I can't be the one you turn to now that everything's falling apart. He looked at me, his eyes full of pain. I understand, he said, his voice raw. But I need you to know something. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything I did to you. I took a deep breath, wiping away the tears that threatened to fall. It's too late for apologies, Daniel. We can't go back. We can't undo the past. What we had, it's gone. He nodded, his face a mask of regret. I know. And I'll live with that for the rest of my life. We sat there in silence for a few moments, neither of us knowing what to say. The weight of our past hung between us, a shadow we couldn't escape. Finally, I stood up, ready to leave the chapter of my life that Daniel represented behind. I think it's time for me to go, I said softly, my voice steady. Goodbye, Daniel. He looked up at me one last time, his eyes filled with regret and sadness. Goodbye, Amanda. And with that, I walked away. It wasn't a grand exit, but it was mine. I had made my peace with the past, and now it was time to move forward. As I stepped out into the world, I knew one thing for sure. Sometimes, the hardest part of moving on is letting go of what you thought you wanted, and accepting that some things are just not meant to be.